Welcome back everybody to another Valorant video. In today's episode we're going to be covering the roles and what their responsibilities are on the team. This is going to be a generalization. Everything does change a little bit on a case-to-case basis, and this is by no means a comprehensive guide for any particular characters. This is more broad terms, and I'm going to be showing everything here on Split A site. I know it's not like a popular map, but it's a good one to explain things on. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Starting off with the Duelists, it's your job to make space for the team. Your whole purpose is to enable your team to work a little bit better for you. Opening picks are super important. Basically, your whole goal is to get people onto site. Now, if this means you have to die in the process, a 1-for-1 trade on attack is very heavily in favor of the attackers, because you're going to have a lot more of your team pushing that site than the enemy will have holding that site, because they're going to be spread along the map more. So if you get a 1-for-1 trade, say you're playing Jet, you get a kill, you die off of it, then your team's now working in like a 4v2 max, usually, as long as the enemy's not stacking site. So that should be a super easy take for them. So, as an example, using Jet, a great way to make space, peek an unexpected angle first, and you can even peek this angle with your dash up, get out if you can't get your kill, and you're going to be pushing up to make sight on here. You can use your smoke as you need. I'm not a Jet main by any means, so my smoke control is not good, but this gives you really good control over Heaven, and you can do this very quickly and overwhelm your enemies doing so. Now what this is going to do is it's going to really enable the rest of your team to make their way onto site and not have to worry, in this case, about Heaven, but in general, wherever you're pushing, it's going to make them not have to worry about that. You're going to have the angle covered, or at the very least, you're going to have the person up there dead. And then kind of your goal is to play a little bit more aggressive. So after you have Spike planted, it's really useful on Duelists, if enough of your team is still alive. It's really useful to set up lurks so that you catch your enemies off guard while they're rotating. So in the case of this, say you get Heaven control, someone plants, you can either hold up on Heaven, no problem, or you can even push down this way and get ready to catch people off guard while they have their knives out, sprinting towards A site. This is going to give you a really strong advantage for post-plant scenario. If you pick off the enemy team, you're going to be working really well. A lot of Duelists, have heavy movement-based abilities, which makes it really easy for them to get in, get a kill, and immediately get out. You don't have to worry as much about dying. Really, as Duelist, you got your primary and secondary. Your primary Duelist is there solely to push in. That's going to be kind of your sole purpose in the game, is to push in, get kills if you can, but at the very least, you're making that space for your team. Now, secondary Duelists, they do have a slightly different role to play. A lot of the time, your primary Duelist is going to be the one pushing in with your team, making that space. You can have both Duelists do it as well. But you want your primary Duelist to be the first one pushing into different sight lines. Now we're going to cover it later, how your controllers and initiators are going to help you out with that. But for Duelist, all you really need to know is you're supposed to make space. If you're not making space, you're not quite doing your job for the team. The only other thing, for example, secondary Duelists tend to have a responsibility for, is a lot of the times they like to lurk and catch people off guard. So for example, your whole team's pushing A, say you're playing a secondary Duelist here, you're going to wait until people are giving up on mid and starting to rotate, and if you time it well, you should be able to pop out as soon as people are like knife out running across mid. They're not really paying attention, and that's kind of the goal of secondaries. A little less making room and more catching your enemies off guard. Of course, a lot of secondary Duelists can also do some primary Duelist responsibilities. It's just not as strong as having a full primary. So without further ado, let's move on to controllers. Alright, so controllers. Your whole purpose is to block off lines of sight to make it easier for your primary... Did I say Duelist? Controller. You're going to make it easier for your primary duelist to get in and make their picks and make their space. So a lot of the times what you're going to be wanting to do is make sure that as your duelists are pushing in with their abilities, your abilities are making it so that the enemies can't get at your duelists from multiple angles. You're going to be helping your duelists isolate 1v1s. That's really the strength of controllers, and it makes it so easy for your team to push in. For example, my personal favorite setup on A site, send one smoke there, and one smoke up top. So what this does is it means that when your duelist pushes, they have to peek this angle, they have to peek this here, and then they're pretty much good to go. It's really hard for people from way down at the end to shoot down through the main area here, and people from heaven aren't concerned. And if they are peeking out, if you do the smoke well, they're going to be peeking in a really difficult spot. It's going to be hard for them to peek out without just immediately getting killed or being way too out in the open. This is also a good smoke, but the issue with this one is it gives people hiding here absolutely no restriction. They're still free to fire, hence my favorite one being shadows traveling. So this is the sole purpose of controllers. This is why certain, like for example Breeze, where it has a lot of really long sight lines, a lot of areas where people can hold from, controllers like Viper are super strong. You got that wall. That wall blocks off so many lines of sight at once, you basically don't have to worry about anything. That pretty much sums up the importance of controllers. Blocking lines of sight, making sure your team has a good chance to get onto site. Sometimes you can be the backup spike carrier if your Sentinel doesn't want to do it. Sentinels, Initiators, and Controllers can do it. I don't really recommend any Duelists taking Spike. If you do take Spike, you can be selfish, give yourself your own smoke, and plant inside of it. But I still think it's way better to play for your team, throw them for specific sight lines where your team can push in without having to worry about as many angles. That's where all your strength comes from, not so much playing for yourself. You have to be very selfless as a controller. I'd almost argue even more so than most Sentinels. You gotta be willing to play for your team. But that sums up the majority of it, so I'm going to move straight on to Initiators. Alright, on to Initiators. So, your goal as an Initiator is, again, all about supporting your duelist. You're going to want to make their job easier. With controllers blocking off lines of sight, your goal is to gather intel most of the time. Obviously, certain things I'll be saying in this video aren't fully applicable to every character, but this is the gist of the roles. For example, on attack as Skye, you're going to be wanting to use your dog, get in, figure out where people are. This gives you so much free intel without having to risk any damage being taken to your actual allies. Another thing about Skye that you guys might not know is when you throw in your hawk, if it blinds someone, you'll get a audio cue.
Hawk out! Blinded!
I believe there's a voice line, and the hawk explosion sounds different when people are actually blinded by it. So if you send in your hawk and your Skye says blinded, that means there's people there, there's people within line of sight for that hawk. Gives you a lot of really good intel. There's always kind of a third, less specific Initiator ability. For Skye, it's her heal. For Sova, it's his shock darts. For KO, it's his grenades. But basically, it's your flexible ability. Not for gathering intel or disabling certain parts of the enemy team. It's more just for helping your team out a lot more. Or in the case of Sova and KO, it's going to be to just get AoE damage. It's a great way to almost get controller abilities out of your Initiators. So that's kind of your main points to focus on as Initiator. You usually want to throw in your dog or your drone or your knife as KO. You're gonna want to throw those in before your initiator before your duelist, fully commits to their push. You're gonna help give them the intel they need to make space. You're gonna help completely support them. A lot of this game revolves around supporting your duelists. If your duelists don't have help, they're just gonna end up dying, and you're gonna have a useless trade, and it's gonna just be harder for your team to push in. I'm not saying duelists are the be-all end-all, but a lot of the time you're going to have one person on your team that's supposed to push in faster, and you got to enable that. Otherwise, you're never going to have any sort of agency on the site. That pretty much sums up the initiators, so let's move on to Sentinels. Oh, before I move on, sorry. Sentinels also your secondary objective. Usually your Sentinel has Spike. What you're going to want to do is when they're planting Spike, ideally, you're going to be covering your flank until they have Spike planted, and then you guys can switch off, and you can take a more aggressive angle. Sentinels are great for covering flanks, but a lot of their utility tends to lean more towards planting Spike. So it's great to have them usually the last on site, which is why they're great at planting Spike. Get them last on site, plant the Spike. While they do so, you're watching your flank, and then you guys can switch back. That is a little bit more case-to-case basis than some of the tips in this video, but it's good to keep in mind. The other thing for initiators and controllers is a lot of them also have really good abilities for lineups. Think Sova, your Brimstones, your Breaches, that kind of thing. You're going to have a lot of really good lineups, so while your Sentinel is playing for Spike, getting kind of behind, watching your flank, you can usually get into a really good spot where you can then start setting up your lineups. I don't have one to show on Sky because she doesn't really have lineups, but a lot of the times those are a great way to secure post-plant, is to be ready to use your lineups, and you're going to want to try really hard to survive. That's kind of the key. If you survive long enough, you can use your lineups, but do not by any means hold on to your utility for the sole purpose of lineups. It's way better to use your ability and stay alive than it is to die and not get to use it at all just because you wanted to do a lineup. So always keep that in mind when you're thinking about your lineups. Alright, so Sentinels are built quite different than most of the other roles in the game. And there's quite a bit of variety in them. But the main goal of Sentinels is to hold down your flank. Most Sentinels have some sort of trap or way to completely stop enemies from coming from behind you, or at least give you a warning when they are. So that's kind of what you want to play off of as a Sentinel. You're going to be the last person on site most of the time. You are going to be the one usually carrying Spike. You're going to be the whole reason your team doesn't get killed from behind. As you push in, different characters do it different ways. A great way for Chamber, for example, to plant Spike is to get some TPs out, and then you can plant or you have charge, and as soon as you're done, you can TP back and continue watching your flank. The nice thing about Sentinels is you can plant Spike easily with your team doing their jobs as well, and you can usually come to your flank and just be ready to play off of your util. For example, as Chamber, as soon as you hear his trap start going off, you peek, you kill the person that's hitting, easy kill. Cypher, same deal. KO, similar. Killjoy, sorry. That's kind of your main play style, is to protect the flank, plant Spike, and stay alive. You're useless if you don't use your utility. So staying alive is the most important thing, especially on Sentinel. Obviously it applies to everyone, you don't want anyone to die, but it's really important on Sentinel. On attack, Sentinels are very much designed for planting Spike and holding your flank, mainly because they don't have very many abilities that help them do anything else. It's really hard to play attack as Sentinel on your own. That's why, in my opinion, it can be quite hard to win attacking rounds as solo queue. But as long as you can get those defending rounds, you're good to go. And that's what we're going to do later. We're going to talk about how defense works versus attacking. But that's going to be later in the video. And in fact, we're going to move on to that right now. Alright, attacking side for Duelists. Your role changed pretty significantly on defense versus offense because you're not really needing to make space for your team. What's going to be really important is gathering information for your team. This is why it's really useful to spread out your often 2 duelists, ideally on a team. It's good to spread them out between 2 different sites. So the really nice thing about duelists is as soon as walls drop, you can peek, you can probably get a kill if you're skilled enough, but the most important thing is most duelists have a great way to immediately get out. Which is fantastic for gathering information, figuring out which site the enemy team is pushing, and allowing your team to capitalize off of it. The nice thing about duelists is you have a really good opportunity to take aggressive angles that the enemy doesn't expect, especially with characters like Jet that can get into very strange positions. But the nice thing is you can be very surprising to the enemy, which can usually result in an easy 1, maybe 2 kills and some damage. And then a lot of the time after getting a kill, you can peace out really easily. Very quick, very easy, completely safe, usually only taking a little bit of damage. So that's kind of the main point of duelists on defense. Holding aggressive angles that the enemy doesn't expect, and getting information. You are the scout. Alright, so the job of controllers on defense is to slow the enemy's push. A great way to do this... Oh, sorry, let me just end game phase real quick. Great way to do this is using your smokes, your line of sight blocking abilities, to make sure that the enemies can't push in as easily. For characters like Omen, that's super easy with one-way smokes. Like this, where you can see the feet and the enemies can't see you. But if you don't have, for example, Omen with one-way smokes, you're going to want to make smokes that... This isn't a great one on this map, but you want to great smokes that make a wall. Because that's going to make it so that when the enemies come out, you're going to have an easy time shooting them because they can only come from one area. They're going to walk straight into your crosshair no matter where they go. Whereas they are going to be coming out blind and having to check every single angle because they have no information yet. Using your smokes, you can often either really slow down the enemy's push or even completely stop it at times. A lot of the time for people like Brimstone, your smokes last so long that if you throw your smoke down when the enemy's pushing, they don't want to push into your smoke, they'll fully just rotate off. That's quite common for attackers in this game, to see a long-lasting smoke or constantly recurring smokes and just get out because they know they're going to die if they push through, especially certain team comps. Your other really strong benefit as a controller is you can smoke off areas in such a way where when the enemy entry duelist, your primary duelist, pushes on and start to try and get a trade, your smoke is preventing their team from trading off of their death. So if whoever's holding your angle for you wins that 1v1 against the entry duelist, the enemy team is still in the smoke and can't fire back. Accurately, anyway. So it oftentimes will give you a really good free kill on an entry duelist, which is very, very valuable on defense, without your team being able to take any damage off of it. Very, very optimal. And just one more time, I want to emphasize the best way to smoke off an area or a choke point with controller. You're going to want to put it, so if I'm holding from here, I don't want a big bubble here because the enemy can come from here, they can come from here, they can come out here. Let me give you an example of that. So if you're holding here, the enemy can come out here, 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 here. They have so many options, it's just not as helpful for you. You're still going to have to move your mouse a lot. The best way to do it is, if I can set one up here, to make this kind of wall where they can only push from realistically one area. They can only come out here, and when they do, they have to look everywhere, right? Just as I was saying earlier. So a lot of the times you hold this from a side angle, they push through, easy kill. They can't even see you by the time you have completely eliminated them. So that is just one fantastic way to use smokes. Now that is a generalization. 99% of the time you're going to want to use your smokes that way. There are a few occasions where you would do otherwise, but I would be paying attention to specific, character-specific guides for that information. As certain characters can use your smokes in different ways. For example, Omen one-ways. Super easy to pull off and very, very valuable. Alright, initiator time. Your goal is to gather information without having to risk anyone on your team. So when you hold a site, for example, as Sova, you're going to be throwing a recon dart in, figuring out where the team's going, or the enemy's pushing from, and using that information to either rotate your team around the map or keep people on a specific point. The most valuable thing you can do as an initiator on defense is to stay alive and keep your utility up. And I'm gonna say right now, on defense, it is way more important to stay alive and play retake on any character than it is to get a 1-for-1 trade. As I was saying earlier, if you have 2 people on A site, 2 people on B site, and someone playing mid, you get a 1-for-1 trade on A site. Now it's a 4v1 on A site because you only had 2 people there. So they get a way bigger advantage off of that 1-for-1 kill than your team does. So you're going to be using your utility to scan different areas and identify where the enemy's going. Sova has that in his drone and his E. KO has his knife, etc., etc. Initiators are great for getting intel, and that's usually what you want to play for. There's the exception of Breach, which is a little bit different. I don't have a guide on him because I just started making Valorant content, but if you want more specifics about Breach in particular, I'd recommend checking out someone else's videos. There's tons of great character-specific guides out there. And Breach is just a little unique for an initiator, so I'm not going to cover all his best strats on here. The other nice thing about initiators is you usually have really good setups. This goes for some controllers as well, think Viper. But it's great if you know that the enemy is planting on default. You can just set up your... This is not a lineup, but you can just set up your lineup, shoot your shock dart or your Viper snakebite right onto default and at least damage or maybe even scare them off of the plant and buy your team some more time. Really valuable for post-plant. Alright, time for Sentinels. Defense is where you shine. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to pick your site every round. Ideally, you switch up your site so that the enemy doesn't get too familiar with your setups. And you're going to want to place all your utility in such a way where it's only going to slow down the enemies or even stop them from pushing in. Everything you do is about setup, which is why it's incredibly important as soon as buy phase starts that you start running to your site and you start preparing your setups. You're going to want to do things like this, where you set up a turret, you set up your alarm bot.
Placing alarm bot.
For different characters, obviously, you have different versions of traps. But you're going to want to set everything up and be ready to hold. And your whole objective is to keep the enemy from pushing on. And you're going to play off of your utility. As soon as you hear alarm bot go off, you peek, you shoot whoever it's hitting. As soon as your sentry goes off, you peek, you shoot whoever it's hitting. You have a really good advantage of setting up your own crossfires. Everyone's who gets stuck in a trap or gets attacked by a trap, their first goal is to stop and shoot the trap. Say it's a cypher trap, chamber, whatever it is. They're distracted shooting it. That's a great time for you to get a kill. And if the enemies are pushing onto, for example, the B site in this case, the opposite site as you, you're not immediately going to rotate unless you know all 5 enemies are over there. You're going to want to stay, if you're only seeing 2 or 3 on B site, you're going to want to stay on site, use your utility. It's also really handy because usually, think Cypher Trips and Killjoy's abilities, everything takes time when you recall them.
Bot coming back.
If I take back my bot, there would be a cooldown. Take back my alarm bot, again, cooldown. So the longer you hold, the less detrimental your cooldown is going to affect you. Because if you take it down, you start rotating, 2 seconds later, someone starts pushing through A, you have to go back with 0 utility up. And you don't get the information of them pushing in. It's a really great way to stop the enemies from giving up on the initial site they're going for and going for the other site, because you're going to be holding it down. But if you're holding down the site they start pushing, again, you're going to just motivate them to leave, which is going to buy your team time, it's going to give tons of information, and you guys will be golden. You can set up great flanks off of that. It's just really, really good for your team. The great thing about Sentinels is you can put your utility into a site instead of having to stack more people onto a site. So if you have one Killjoy holding down a site, that's way more valuable than spreading out your entire team over the entire map. You can have more people in mid if you have a Killjoy on A, and it just gives you a lot more versatility in the map for your entire team. It allows you guys to work off of each other a lot better and set up faster rotations. Alright, one last thing I want to mention before I end the video is for post-plant setups. If you guys have spike down, your role kind of determines how you play. Like I said, a duelist can watch the enemies coming out, rotating from other sites, and try and catch them off guard. That's a great way to get free kills. You don't want both your duelists. I would say you don't even want more than one person doing that. Ideally, you're going to have at least a Sentinel and one other person on site or near site, holding angles and being ready to trade off of each other. That's kind of the key. You're going to want to try and trade off of each other. The enemy does have Peeker's advantage when retaking site. So if you can set up angles where as soon as your teammate starts shooting at an enemy, you can then pop out and shoot at that enemy, and if one of you die, you get a free kill one way or another. Sometimes you both stay alive during that. That's fantastic. Initiators and controllers, I would say one but not both of you on a team can come back again to your flank and set up for lineups. That's another great way to play post-plant. I still recommend Sentinels kind of watching the flanks, but Initiators can help out with that too. It depends on your characters and your playstyles. But a lot of the times, a Sentinel or an Initiator on the back to watch flank, and someone to set up their lineups is going to be really valuable. And then it basically becomes a defense scenario. Your controllers are using their smokes to make it harder for enemies to push into sight. Your Sentinels are, if they have any abilities left, using them to slow enemies from pushing onto site, etc., etc. Basically everything we just covered. So that's going to do it for today's episode. I think that covers everything I wanted to talk about today. If there's anything I'm missing, I will add it in the description of the video. And if you guys have any other opinions or any other thoughts, anything to add, please let me know down in the comment section. These videos aren't like coming from a professional or anything like that. I just want to start a conversation and hopefully help people out who are new to the game, especially now that the new act just came out. There's an influx of people playing, and hopefully this helps you out in some way, shape, or form. But again, everything's case-to-case basis, so take it with a grain of salt. And without further ado, have a lovely rest of your day, evening, morning, afternoon, and night. Bye-bye.